As ISIS continues to rampage in Iraq and Syria and even beyond, federal prosecutors here, they have charged an Illinois National Guard member and his cousin with conspiring to provide material support to the terror group. Now, a short time ago, I spoke to J.M. Berger. He is a non-resident fellow with the Brookings Institution and co-author of the new book, ISIS, The State of Terror. You know, the president made reference to ISIS, I believe in 2014, as kind of the JV to al-Qaeda's varsity. Whether it was ill-timed or not, that analogy has seemingly flip-flopped in the last year. Just why the flip, and also, what do you attribute the rapid growth to?
Well, I think there's a combination of factors. Partly our expectations have been off. I think the administration in particular, and many in the outside analytical and academic communities, were very fixated on al-Qaeda as the frame in which you would see the global jihadist movement. So when ISIS started to split away from al-Qaeda, people weren't really ready to assimilate that. That said, they have made some very dramatic progress. They've been benefited from the civil war in Syria, obviously, tremendously. And they built on networks that they had going all the way back to the Iraq war. So, for instance, their expansion into Libya was based on a cluster of foreign fighters who had come from a specific town in Libya years previously.
The idea that if somebody's going to post a beheading, you would think that would turn off anyone with a sense of humanity, and there would be no type of connection to people, especially if they're saying this is Islam. Obviously, that's been wrong by just looking at some of the numbers. Talk about who they're appealing to and why their appeal is resonating. Is it as simple as this is millennials, this is intuitive, especially if you're in a depressed minority that doesn't see much hope? Why has this gained a following when you would think it's so reprehensible no one would want to associate with it?
Well, it's more complicated than a lot of the factors that we often attach to this stuff. Two of the main factors that really drive the media strategy, the extreme violence that we see coming out of there, are a strategy document that they're following that was written by a jihadist forum member some years back that really recommended taking an approach of polarizing audiences. So they don't want anybody sitting on the fence. So when these videos come out, they're not necessarily meant to attract as many people as they are meant to enrage people, to get people into a war that then will have other side benefits. Secondly, ISIS really subscribes to a belief in that the apocalypse is at hand. Whether its senior leadership believes that or not, a lot of its adherents do, and a lot of its messaging is tied to that. And throughout extremism in history, what we've seen is that you need to have a really extreme provocation for people to behave in really extreme ways. And the end of the world is about as extreme of a scenario as you can have.
As we talk here, we're coming in the context where two men from Illinois, one of which was actually in the National Guard, the U.S. National Guard, have been arrested in connection here with an attempt to join ISIS. Previously, you've written a book called Jihad Joe, talking about this very issue, about the appeal to people even in the States.
Well, the appeal is really broad and varied. What we've seen in this group of people, and really in terrorism in general, it's very frustrating for both for academics who study it and for journalists, is that there's not a single path to go there. We've seen Americans involved in jihadist movements for the entire duration of the history of the modern jihadist movement, so that they're involved in ISIS is not surprising. What we did see was that fewer Americans were really getting involved with ISIS until they made the caliphate declaration, and that corresponded to a change in their messaging and the recruitment pitch. And the old jihadist groups were really pitched on an idea that we're weak. We represent Muslims. Muslims are weak. We're using terrorism as a tool because terrorism is a tool for weak people to use against strong actors. And ISIS has completely inverted that, and that really, correlates to the declaration, their claim that they're an Islamic caliphate. They project strength. They're saying, instead of saying, help defend Muslims because Muslims are weak, they're saying, we're winners, join us because we're winners.
To the hardest question I think to ask is, what do we do about it? I know you gave context both in the book to say, listen, before everyone panics here, this is not some modern day Nazism or Stalinism here. They're not going to take over the world, and moreover, you're much more likely to get killed in a car accident at the hands of these terrorists. That all said, it's a tough sell to say use patience here when you're talking about people that seem to be operating outside of any form of moral code and without even boundaries, it seems. And now people think, my gosh, you know, they can even be aided or abetted with even elements here in the States. So how do we fight them?
Well, patience is a tough sell, even for us. I mean, you know, I see the videos that these guys put out, not just the ones that get headlines, but the stuff they put out every day with just unspeakable kind of atrocities being committed, and it's extremely hard to take. At the same time, you know, worse numerically and politically worse atrocities are taking place in Syria by the Assad regime. We don't react to them in the same way because we have a particular reaction to jihadists, which really comes out of September 11th. I think, you know, somebody asked me recently about this, and my response was that, you know, ultimately we're probably stuck with ISIS until there's a major regional war that's really going to reset a lot of the political boundaries in the Middle East. And, you know, I think I said that on Wednesday, and yesterday we saw Saudi Arabia started bombing in Yemen, and so, you know, we may be seeing that kind of thing sooner than we think. And I don't think Americans want to get involved in a gigantic, messy, multi-sided war in the Middle East, and I suspect it would also not be the best strategy for us either.
Is there maybe a silver lining that ISIS is beginning to flame out on itself, and that one of the things they've proven here is that they can't govern, and that we're already hearing reports about basic governance issues? You have graft, you don't have clean drinking water. At a certain point, it might be appealing to some here to fight the power, but then when they look what's left behind, they may not like what they actually got. Are we starting to see that?
We are starting to see signs that that could happen. I mean, well, right now, ISIS has completely controlled its messaging. Its executions of journalists aren't just to send a message to the West, they're also to send a message to journalists, which is that it's not safe to come here and provide independent reporting. So a lot of what we see coming out of their regions, you know, imagery and reporting is stuff that they generate, and their version of events is that everything's going great. So, you know, what we can do to combat that, I think, is we can deploy some of our intelligence resources, even if it means exposing some of those resources in a way that intelligence agencies traditionally don't want to. If we can show that there's, you know, chaos in the streets and you know, bad conditions inside of ISIS territories and really vividly illustrate it, I think that helps undercut their position.
Well, again, the book is ISIS, the State of Terror, obviously very timely. J.M. Berger, I really appreciate a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And on the other side of the break here, we will turn to local issues, including a look at Hudson Valley headlines.